Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to talk about taxes. So as I do more of these videos, I learn more, and it's getting better. So I have my little form over here to the side that I've now learned how to put on the screen so that you can see all this stuff, and this is to give you an idea of the website that I'm going to build. It's not going to be anything like this, but it gives you an idea of kind of what it is that I'm going for, because it's just there's too much detail absolutely to go into it, but it's going to be a lot of automated things. And so, like, for example, the questions, there'll be an area for questions, or maybe a completely different page, and everybody can propose their questions and then thumbs up or thumbs down those things, and then at some point in time probably erase all except for maybe the big 10, and then have the questions brought back again. So then that way, if there were really good questions, they can kind of find a way to get into it, because you have to worry about well, we're going to talk about that, the 2080 rule there. And so this is coming in part because I saw this video from Styxhexenhammer talking about how Biden's massive planning and spending is going to have to result in a tax increase. And it's because, of course, the government doesn't produce anything at all. And I've done some videos on taxation, but one of the biggest differences is this little notepad that I have over here, which will be in all of my videos from here on out, where I will continue to add more and more and more and more and more and more information, and it's going to keep going. And I suspect at some point in time I'm going to have to separate all this out, because taxes, what does that incur? It incurs a lot of things. So if you like all this stuff and you're tired of the lies and you want all this information because you don't want to be a low information consumer or voter or whatever it is, then I'm going to hook you up and we're going to make sense out of it all. So make sure that you like, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, join, become a member on whichever platform that you're watching. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, Bitchute. I also have Patreon and Subscribestar. Please help me out, because I need all the money that I can get. There's not going to be an end to it. There will be a different way that I do all this, though, later down the road. So let's take a look at it. So the first thing is that this is not about changing minds. This is about showing the lies, whether they're intentional or not. It doesn't matter. It's still lies. I would say that if it's directly corresponding to something that somebody does, such as teachers with teachers union, it's like, yes, I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are being too lazy, they're not doing their due diligence. Same thing with politicians. But if you're like an economist and you're giving your say on nuclear engineering, I'm going to assume that the lie is absolutely unintentional, that they don't know what they're talking about. But also at the same time, my response to that is kind of, how about you shut the hell up, because you don't know what you're talking about. You're no different than the rest of us. You might have this specialty in economics, and maybe there you're really something special, but for the rest of it, it's like, no, you can shut the hell up. So first, let's go ahead and start with definition. So tax is a compulsory contribution to state revenue levied by the government on its workers' income, business profits, or added to the cost of some goods, services, and transactions. That's it. So in other words, the money that you make, your wages, it gets taxed. The profits of a business gets taxed. Everything that you buy and you sell gets taxed. And services, so if somebody comes and mows your lawn, or if you get a massage, you're not buying something that you can hold that's tangible in your hand. You can't hold the lawn when after or before it's been mowed. You can't hold a massage, but still it's a transaction. Money's being changed hands right there. So whenever taxes go up, this means that everything goes up. So this is an example I've given before, is that you have farmers and they produce wheat, it gets transported and it's at a mill, and it gets milled down into flour, and it gets transported again, and it goes to a bakery and it gets baked into bread, and then it ends up in the store. Every one of these, every single stop is a separate business. Every time it gets transported, that's a transportation company like CR England Trucking Company or Swift Company or whatever, and all of them have their own employees, their own equipment, their uniforms, hard hats, gloves, machines that mill it, and all the parts and the technicians that they have, and the bakery, same thing, their ovens, and they're baking all the bread, and the little rollers that it slides on, kind of like a factory with an assembly line kind of thing going on, and being wrapped up. All of it, all that had to be bought. All of it has to be maintained. All of it has people. So it's everything. Every single thing gets taxed. It all goes up because in order to cover those taxes, they have to increase their prices on stuff. or people get fired, and so the economy takes a hit because now these people have lost their jobs and they're not making money anymore, so they're not able to spend money because they don't have money. So there's nothing good about taxes whenever it comes to all this stuff. And then we have a problem. So before we get into that, let's go ahead and continue on with Styxhexenhammer here, and he's talking about how this is just an excuse with everything that's been going on with COVID and the lockdowns and this relief package to the people about how this money isn't going to go anywhere. This money is just going to get tied up like it. So yesterday I made a video about the teachers union, and there was this one politician from New York, and he talked about how he helped pass a bill for $300 million for all the problems that were being faced by the schools and the teachers and all this stuff. And then later in the video it shows that none of this stuff was being distributed. It was sitting in a warehouse, and it was all these school supplies, pencils, papers, all this stuff, and it was just sitting there doing nothing. And it was the same thing that happened over in Cuba whenever they had that hurricane or something that just flooded everything on out, and they were like, where are all the relief supplies? And they were sitting out there, what was it, on the airfield or something like that, or it was just in a stadium, and they just had all this food and all this water and everything, and nobody was doing anything with it because it was nothing but a bunch of red tape that kept this from going, because every time that you do this stuff, it just gets more administratively heavy. So that's what they were talking about with the teachers union the other day, and it's like all these people who have all these really high-paying jobs. This is what he's talking about right now in this video, about how it's not going to go to the people. So one of the things that this 1.9 trillion billion stimulus, or 1.9 trillion stimulus package does, is that there are billions that they're going to Tesla with Elon Musk. Several billion went to the Bill Gates Foundation. And it's like, why? These are the richest people on the planet. That they've held the number one spot. I think Bill Gates actually lost it to, I don't remember, but he was up there for like a good decade. Whenever I was growing up, he was the only one. He didn't have competition. And it's like, yes, I've seen this before where these people who are really rich and powerful in the government, they will have like this beautiful home in the middle of nowhere, and then they get this beautifully paved road and perfectly utility lines running out for electricity, and all the good services and amenities that you would expect in town are now out of town. And it's because of all this contribution, back and forth, swoggling, where everybody has taken their hand and dipped it into the cookie jar and taken it out, and they've given it to somebody else, and then they give it back through subversive means, just like with the Hillary Clinton Foundation or the Clinton Foundation, and they were taking all this money through that, and they paid themselves because they were a part of all this, and it's just ridiculous. And it's all their friends and family. Charities are a big ripoff. If you want to get a really good paying job, go work for a charity. Very little of the money for a lot of these charities go to where they're supposed to. Instead, it ends up being really huge salaries and everybody patting themselves on the back instead of actually doing anything. So this is just a really good video where he just goes off and he exaggerates on this even more. It's all legitimate, and we have plenty of videos of people who speak about this on both sides, and whenever you actually get both sides, because usually it tends to be one-sided, and that the other people won't come. This is all that ever happens. Whenever 9/11 happened and the Twin Towers went down, it wasn't just those towers, it was also the surrounding buildings there. They talked about how it cost a hugely exaggerated amount to be able to fix them, but the buildings that were around them that were also a part of the complex, because the Twin Tower complex, it wasn't just those two, it was all these other buildings. The other buildings that were around there that were also multiple levels, I guess maybe not all of them are government buildings, but the buildings around them, they got rebuilt in less than a year. But the Twin Towers got rebuilt. It took like 20 years for them to get those things. It took several years. The first contractor that they hired gave them $20 million. And then they didn't do anything, but they walked away with the $20 million anyways. I think they were actually being prosecuted against that stuff last I heard, but I haven't kept up in it in a long time. That was quite a while ago. And so we're going to move over to Jordan Peterson, and then Prager University, and then John Stossel is going to be the last one. So with Jordan Peterson, he is going to link in the description below for his video as well. He is going to talk about the Pareto Principle, and this states that for many outcomes, roughly 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the causes. And in this video, this is he's got several of these. This one is a little more focused on economics and money, and he's talking about how this is how you get the 1% of the people. Where, and in the video they gives more specific numbers on it, but roughly 20% of the population has 80% of the wealth, something along those lines. But whenever he's talking in this lecture, he talks about that this is something that happens everywhere. So with books being sold by authors, and so it's like, well, Stephen King is one of the 1% of all that stuff, and then like nobody does anything else, that they're all poor, and part of it is because he's like in airports and all the bookstores, and it's because everybody knows he's successful. And he talks about that this is also something that happens in sporting events, such as with basketball players making points off of the net right there, that they're the ones. It's just, again, with all the basketball players that are out there, it's this 20-80% split. He's also talked about in other videos and other lectures where it's not just with people and productivity and outcome, but it's also with trees. That 20% of the trees have 80% of the mass. Same thing with stars. That 20% of the stars have 80% of the mass. That this is something that happens everywhere all the time. And it's like, it's a very deep, complicated problem, and it's not just, well, if we just go out and change taxes. It's like, no, that maybe that might be one step of 100 that needs to be done, but we don't ever get past this one thing. So I'm tired of the lies and the running around in damn circles again. And then he talks about the Genie Coefficient. And so with these two, I just Googled them, found them on Wikipedia. This is something I'm familiar with. I've heard it several times before. The Genie Coefficient is a measure of statistical dispersion intended to represent the income inequality or wealth inequality within a nation or any other group of people. In more layman's terms, is whenever you have two groups of people, that the more disparity that you have within their income and their wealth, that unhappier they become. So if there's just a little bit, they're okay. But if it gets to be really big, then the men, especially young men, become very aggressive. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, and he lists some of the reasons why they would want to do this. One of this is being able to have the selection of sexual partners, and just kind of wealth and power and status, because you can get those things in different ways through being violent. And that this happens within neighborhoods, cities, states, countries. This was something that it was back in like 1912 whenever they first discovered this, and that they just apply this consistently all over the place and without falter or fail. And so that's something that I think is obviously related to taxes, because part of the taxes is being able to take the money, especially from the wealthy, and redistributing it back to everyone else, at least in some of it. And one of the problems that he talks about here is, how do we get people out of zero? The comparison that he makes is to the game Monopoly. I think everybody's played Monopoly. You all start off the same. You have the same amount of money. You don't have any properties. You go around the board, and at some point in time, somebody ends up with everything, and everyone else is at zero, and they have nothing. And it's like, well, that's kind of the way that is in real life too. Is that if you get down to zero and you're getting in trouble, and so you have fines from the bank, and you have fees from the government and from everything else out there, and you're not making nothing or close to it, how do you dig yourself out of all that stuff? And the reason why you have all these fines and fees levied against you is because you didn't have the money in the first place. But you need it because you need to be able to eat and have a place to live and all this stuff. And so whenever the bar is set up real high, because, oh, well, we've had taxes, so now we've raised how much everything is, because that bread is expensive because of the example that I gave before. But it's not just the bread, it's also the clothes and everything else. It's every single thing that you buy anywhere, anytime. It doesn't matter what, whether if it's gasoline, your electronics, keyboards, speakers, pens, pencils, keys. I mean, you name it, it all costs more. Why? Because you raise taxes. So you don't want to raise taxes. You want to keep them down as low as possible, because what's easier to do? to give somebody $200 and then they can go out and buy a whole bunch of things and be able to get by, or giving every single person $2,000 who's in need? It's like, well, obviously the $200. And then another good question is, how do we deal with people who have excess? There's a lot of people out there. I saw a video where it was kind of this Lifestyles Rich and Famous kind of thing, but more modern. And there was this guy where he had red Lamborghinis, and he had like a dozen of them, and then he had all these other cars where he had an under-car garage where you went up, you parked your car, brought it underground, then you could drive it off, and you could park it. Then it would raise up on an elevator underground. Then you could park another car underneath it. And he bought like every he bought a Lamborghini every year for like the past 10 years, and they were all red. And then he had some other cars that were red too. He had this place filled with it. It was all underground and all with this elevator stuff going all over the place, doing absolutely nothing. At least with these people who are car collectors and they show it to the people and they let them come by and take a look. At least they're doing, I guess, something with it. This guy was doing absolutely nothing. It was trash. I don't respect or admire that person at all for this excessive wealth with just trash, just garbage. I tell you what, he can just sit and spin until he burns himself raw. And then we have this video from Prager University where she's talking about what I really like is she's talking about how the government plays with words and does this word salad soup nonsense, progressivity. And it's like, well, progress kind of means something, but this isn't what it is, and that's why they have the little avidity at the end of it, and it means this completely trash thing. And it sounds good on the surface, but nobody's really heard of it. But it sounds nice because we like progress. And it's just because, again, politicians, they're not scientists. They don't care about the truth. They're not economists. They don't understand the economy. They're politicians. And they are concerned about getting votes. They get votes so they can get reelected. That's their job. It's not any of this other stuff here. And so that's what they do. They lie about all this stuff. I think half of them don't know what they're talking about. Most of the time, and it's because it's all complicated. So right now, just from this little bit that I've done with taxes, just taxes, it's like this isn't anything, and you expect these people to know all this stuff because they're expected to know about taxes and the economy and every other thing with the government. So welfare benefits, the VA system, the military, the diplomacy, HUD with housing, education, regulations for the environment and businesses and fair practice standards, and the highway system and the infrastructure and the electrical grid and the FDA, Food Tobacco Administration and firearms. It's like, who the hell knows all this stuff? It's ridiculous. It's an old, outdated system, and everything that we have has become vastly more complicated. And I know exactly how to deal with all this trash. And I'm going to criticize her here too, because this Caroline Keene right here, this political scientist, where she did some kind of study back in 1980 and found that people like it whenever everything is proportional and even and all this stuff. I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn what people like. I do not care. You know why? Because people are dumb. I don't understand all this stuff. Neither do you. And I want to know about what works. And so give me the proof and the evidence behind it. Now, if something like this, if we can apply this to something that works so we can make it even better, okay, that's different. But this isn't where you start off from, well, my feelings are, I just feel like this is better. Doesn't that look nice, man? It just makes me feel all nice and warm. Shut up. Get the hell out of my face. I don't care what you think. Show me something that actually proves it. Because there was that Somerville study that they did. It's decades old now. But they took these inner city students and they came in with these counselors and teachers to try to make them better students, and whenever they did the follow-up later, it's like, nope, it didn't. In fact, it had the opposite. It made them worse. And it was because they were better educated, but because they didn't have any kind of anything to do with morals and values, they became even worse citizens than they were before. Jordan Peterson talked about this. And it's like the thing that they learned was that you don't go back and do the follow-up study to see what really happened. Because whenever you do, you find out that things like everything, it's complicated. It's not to say that we can't solve this stuff. It's not this easy. And if it was easy, then we wouldn't have these problems. This isn't something that's new. Having these problems with taxation and giving money to the poor and dealing with the really wealthy and the really poor, it's been around forever. What are you talking about? And you think that you can just come around and fix it all of a sudden? It's like, this is good to know right here that people are not always aware. So if you have if you're poor and say you're making, we're going to say like $20,000, it gets 10% tax on it, or whatever it may be at the time. It changes, But if you make 40% or $40,000, that first 20% is still only taxed at 10%, and then the additional 20% or the additional 20,000, only that portion gets taxed at 20%, and so on and so forth. But whenever you get up here, and you're making, say you're making $250,000, $250,000, everything above there is 50%. And this makes people question, well, why should I bother making more at my job, or if I'm the business owner, or if I'm an employee, why should I want to do that? And it's not to say that this still may not work. It could be that the numbers are off, so maybe the bottom should be like 5%, and the next one up should be like 8%, and then 15%, and then, I don't know, 18% and 25%. I'm just making numbers up. But maybe the numbers are too high. So then that way people can still have this incentive to make more money without being taxed to death. And they talk about how there's all these different taxes too, or maybe it was a different one, but you have the federal tax, you have state taxes, some places also have city taxes, and so you can just be taxed into oblivion. And there's several different ways that they've talked about taxation and doing it differently, and one of them is that some politicians have proposed taxing only people who, for example, for the transportation system with streets and roads, for example, only people who actually drive on it, but then who does that really affect? It affects the really poor, because they're the ones who have to drive around all over the place. As rich people, I mean, what are they? There was an argument as to why it's the middle class that gets hit the most. And then they talked about the history right here, because there was taxation at one point in time where it was up to 90%. And Kennedy, he brought it down to 70%. And then whenever Reagan came along, he's the one that brought it down to kind of what we normally see today. And then the rest of these bungling idiots, they're actually, in this video, they're talking about how they got rid of the people who were in the 10 to 15%, how they took millions out of it. Millions of people out of it, so they're not paying anymore. But it's a really good video. It's this one from Prager University will help show how politicians are scum. Democrats, Republicans, all of them, and that they're just playing a bunch of word vomit in order to get votes. It's trash. I don't like it. Not one bit. We could definitely do better. So with the last video that I'm going to go over here, this is with AOC, the monster trash clown fired nonsense that we have in politics right now. I mean, this girl doesn't have anything in between her ears besides air, and it's not even hot. It's cold. It's lucky if it even gets lukewarm in there. If she was in, zombies look smarter than she is, and it's just dead, cold, just nothing. Just she's trash. And she's talking about all this crap where it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It sounds really good on the surface, but whenever you start tearing away at it, you find out that it's garbage. And she refers back to the 60s and stuff where we had the 60, 70, 80% tax increase or whatever. And then later in the video on Kennedy there, and he finally stepped it down to 70%. But this guy, this is what he does. This guy, he works and he deals with old tax laws. Where's that good picture of him in there showing where he actually works? This guy goes back and he reviews there. This is what he does. He goes through, because back in the day, in 1912 and in the 20s and 30s and 40s, this is the way that everything was done. It was all done on paper, and so he's reviewing all the tax laws and the effects and what actually happened. And he's like, no, AOC's completely out of her mind. She doesn't know what she's talking about. This is not the effects that they had. So even whenever they had the tax laws at 70, 80, 90%, the rich people were only paying around 40% of their taxes in it. And it's because there's too many loopholes. So one of the loopholes that, if you were ever interested in, is that one of the things that you can do, so you can find a state that has no state taxes, for example, and you can set up a business over there, and you can say that this business is going to provide business services for your business in whichever state that you live in. And so you can have, so you have company A in your state, and you have company B in a state that has no taxes. I think Nevada might be one of them. And so you can have company B do all these services for company A, basically taking all of your profits and revenue over here, and it transfers it over here to Nevada or whichever state has no taxes to it, and then you can take all your profits and earning over here, and you can avoid paying taxes. And that's something that you also do between nations. And so if you have a really big company and you want to get out of paying even more taxes, you can have like a shell company set up over in like the Cayman Islands, and you can say, oh yeah, well, we're providing all these accounting services and bookkeeping services and whatever kind of services. You make something up. And so you can charge your company over here in the States, it all goes over to the Cayman Islands, and then you have a much lower tax rate. So there's a really obvious example of a tax loophole that you can do. All you have to do is set up the business. And the stuff is so easy now that you can buy programs online, and you can pay just a little bit instead of paying a lawyer thousands of dollars to do it. You can just spend a few hundred instead, and then you've got it all going. And then on the B company that's in another state or in another country, that's where, you know, all your really important people, all your friends and family who you want to pay really well, that's where they get paid. It's not through company A. They can still work at company A too, and you can kind of double dip, because again, whenever you were looking at that chart, that stepping stone, you know, where it was 10, 20, 30, 40, you can still pay them and you can do a little bit. But part of the problem is that whenever the more and more laws and regulations that you have, you can't account for every single little thing. So you've got all these policies and regulations over here, and all these regulations, and these regulations, and these regulations, and so on and so forth. And then you can connect them all and loop-de-loop all over the place, and then you've got a tax loophole because you managed to skim away from it. And that's exactly what happens. And it's because it's too much for anybody to be able to do. If you played any kind of... So I play some really massive, insane board games, and there's so many rules to them that happens from time to time, and then that's what they have to do with an update. Or with video games, that's a good example. A lot of you are playing video games, like younger people. That's why they have to do updates all the time, because they put in all these mechanics into it, and somebody figures out a way to exploit it. That's exactly what happens with tax loopholes, is that they figured out a way to exploit it in such a way, and they try to fix it all, but it's like whenever you have... It happens like constantly with video games. Imagine if it was all these people all around the country who were looking for these loopholes, and it's all the laws and regulations and policies, and because there are some things where they hinder you and some things where they want to promote, because it's like, well, we want to promote the housing market sector, and so they'll give you benefits if you do all these things, and it's like, that's exactly how it's done. And so part of with my system is that I have a way of where this guy would not be on the same level as moron AOC over here. They are in two different ballparks. I know a way to separate them out, so then they can still all talk. Everybody can say what they want to. They can post their questions, concerns, whatever. But it's like, AOC is not an economist. She's a moron. She's got something stuck up her butt. I hope she spins it till it burns, and just... Because I don't understand how she managed. I do. I don't understand any good way that a person like this could be in the position that she's in. Because she gets obliterated every single time that she opens her mouth. An example of this is with the migrant crisis that's going on. She was willing to go set up and do this fake staging event with a chain link fence to an empty parking lot. And now that we have it going on with Biden, there's no crisis going on. It's like, oh, are you daft? And then one of the things that happens too is that whenever you increase taxes, people leave. And so here's an interview that John Stoss was doing with Donald Trump, and he's like, yeah, I'm thinking about moving, and he knows plenty of people who do. And then I don't know if it was this video or another video that I was watching, that one state increased their taxes up. Or no, it was a country. It was France. And they increased their taxes, and then all these really wealthy people and their businesses all fled because they went to another country where they didn't have to do all that nonsense. And this is something that they keep repeating in all of these videos time and time again throughout history, all around the world. Whenever any state or country raises their taxes, the rich people, they're rich, they have money, and so they go somewhere else. This is something that's happened right now in California, where Joe Rogan left California and he went to Texas, where Ben Shapiro, he left California, and I think he ended up in Tennessee. It's like, yes, Elon Musk, he left California, and I think he ended up in Texas too, you know, where he's taking Tesla, and I don't know why, because with that stimulus package, he got billions for Tesla. So this is a good place to stop it right here. I'm going to continue to add to this, so continue to watch, because this thing is going to grow and become more lengthy. So like, subscribe, hit the thumbs up button. Thanks a lot, and we will see you again later. Bye.